Welcome to Vertical City. I'm your host, Lennon Richardson. During each episode, I interview one of the world's top experts in architecture, urban design, engineering, or ecology so that we can better understand and develop solutions for sustainable living. Thank you for listening, and get ready to join us on another groundbreaking and uplifting episode. Bruno Padovano was born in Milan, Italy, graduated from the School of Architecture of Witwatersrand University in Johannesburg, South Africa, received a professional degree in architecture and urbanism from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, 2 master's degrees from Harvard Graduate School of Design, and a PhD also from the University of Sao Paulo, where he then became a professor. Bruno's most recent project is the Hope Tower, which he designed to support the homeless population in Sao Paulo. Bru, as he is known in the music industry, is also an accomplished musician and recently released a single titled Homeless Singers in support of this project. Links to Homeless Singers and the other topics discussed in this podcast can be found by visiting verticalcity.org/podcast. So Bruno, welcome to the Vertical City podcast. I know that Brazil has been undergoing a lot of population growth and urban migration over the last 50 to 60 years specifically. But now I know that there's close to 90% of the population living in urban environments, and the birth rates have fallen sharply from the 1960s, where they were at 6 births per woman, and now they're down below 2. Yet cities like Sao Paulo continue to grow. Is this predominantly due to immigration, or is urbanization still a factor?
Well, as you said, there's been a big change occurring in Brazil. I arrived to Brazil in '69, and in those days, the fertility rates were around six, even more than 6. And then the rates started falling, and quite sharply, in fact, over the last decade. Mm-hmm. So we're now really down to less than 2, which means that the population does not reproduce itself,
right?
With such low rates. Brazil is still growing, but it's really growing much less than before. And according to some projections, in 2030, 15 years from now, Brazil should stop growing. It will stop its growth and start maybe even losing population. Of course, unless immigration may fill up that gap. And we are seeing a migration crisis happening in the world. And we already are receiving a flux of people from abroad coming to Brazil, especially from Africa, from other Latin American countries, although Latin America as a whole has been undergoing an improvement, a growth, which not always sees Brazil at the head of the statistics. In fact, other countries like Chile, even Bolivia and Paraguay have experienced quite intensive growth, economic growth. And therefore, the populations of these countries would not be looking at Brazil with such an eager eyes as they may have done in the past. So I would say that now the major flux would be from Africa, North Africa. There are a lot of Syrians coming in. I know about this. Depending on how Brazil works its migration policies, the country should benefit from this flux of people in order not to enter a negative, diminishing population process with an increase of elderly people to the point that this may create some imbalance in the economy. And as some countries are experimenting in the world. Now, it all has to do also with the economics of the country. The country went through a decade of pretty sustained growth, 2 decades of sustained growth. And then suddenly, in the last 2 years, there's been a sharp slowdown in the economy, even more or less corresponding to the fact that Brazil is hosting 2 mega events like the World Cup, which was held last year, and next year the Olympic Games. But the fact is that there's been a lot of criticism due to the expenditures in mega structures, in huge sport equipment, whereas the infrastructure of the country still has many weak points, and housing is still very much a problem, even with this slowing down of the population growth. I know the data in Sao Paulo is really worrisome in that respect.
Okay. So you touched on something that I was planning on asking a little later, but since you brought it up, I'll talk about it now, and that is the Olympic Games. Do you feel that is Brazil ready to host the Olympic Games, and is this going to be a good thing for the country, or is it just going to cause problems like it has for some of the other countries, like Greece that hosted the Olympic Games, but it really didn't seem to help the country at all?
Well, I really have mixed feelings about this. In some ways, in the intangible aspects, there is a sense of some sense of pride in the country in having been able to host, I think, for the 4th time in the history of mega events, the 2 mega events, one after the other. This has occurred before in other countries.
I see.
But very few times, maybe 3-4 times, 4 times with Brazil, I think. So it's not common that a country hosts 2 major sport events like that, one after the other. When the World Cup was held, just before the World Cup, people started perceiving that the economy wasn't doing too well, and took to the streets to protest against the government. And that sort of built up quite sharply just before the World Cup. Then the World Cup came, and it was, in fact, a big success.
Okay, great.
Everybody loved seeing the Cup. Of course, nobody loved the 1-7 semi-final match against Germany. It was a disaster. But up to that point, although people weren't very happy with what they call seleção, which is the national squad, they weren't happy with that team. But they had hopes that the team might pick up as it went along the competition, which did not really happen. And the last 2 games where Brazil scored 1 and had 10 against, and that for a soccer nation like Brazil was quite a bad thing. But still so, Brazilians, I think, felt a sense of pride in seeing, for example, nice stadiums. Our stadiums in Brazil were really very bad, in very bad conditions. So to see at least 12 nice world standard stadiums where Brazilians were finally able to watch games covered from the sun or the rain, and with beautiful viewing conditions and perfect lawns, that I think gave Brazilians a sense of pride, and we as architects, I was not involved in any of these projects, but we followed with great admiration even the work of our colleagues, because they worked under a lot of pressure, and I think they did very well, helped as well by some foreigners. A lot of German stadium designers came to our aid, and there were some criticisms, of course, with regards to the fact that there were no competitions. So, you have to put it all in a balance. And I would say that the Cup had this sort of mixed feeling. On the one hand, it was perceived as something which was a bit unnecessary and out of touch with the Brazilian reality in some ways, but it did bring in at least some nice sport infrastructure. Brazil is a country that follows sports with great enthusiasm, especially soccer. So for the soccer people, I mean, even now, some of the stadiums are still being used quite a lot. Not as much, of course, as one would like to see in view of the investments. But I would say that it was successful as an event, as a social event. And it has left some legacies in some transportation improvements in some of the cities, improvements in the areas of the implementation of the stadia. The fact that, as I said, the stadia were in many cases very poorly, not built, but maintained. And now, of course, they've had an upgrading. But there are problems with maintenance. Some of the stadia are having a problem with maintenance. The Olympic Games, I think, are far more reasonable to be organized, to having been organized in Brazil. And I suspect it's going to be a big success as an event.
That's great.
Because Rio de Janeiro had already held, a little before, maybe 6 years ago, the Pan American Games. And it had invested quite a bit to house those games. And they were a huge success. They were very nice. And they happened at a moment when these tensions were not in the air, see. So the fact that Rio would win the bid, and also due to the fact that it just had held a major regional mega event. So now, with the agenda of an Olympic game, Rio had to face major works, had to remove population, low-income population in certain areas of the city to improve its infrastructure. Because of that, it met with a lot of criticism, and some social tensions were created. But I would say that the city of Rio is looking towards the games with a positive eye, I believe. Although there have been some negative impacts in traffic and some complaints have emerged, but it's the second largest city in Brazil. It was in the past the capital of the country. It lost a lot of its prestige because of the immense growth of Sao Paolo, as sort of a competitor, an urban competitor in more or less the same region of Brazil, in the southeast of Brazil. So Rio, I think, needed this upgrading of its urban landscape. Although we know that it is, like Sao Paulo, a city which is troubled by the lack of adequate housing for a great part of its population. Favelas in Rio are much more visible and much more perceivable than in Sao Paulo, for example, because of the terrain, because of the landscape and the topography. They went up the hills, literally, and by doing that, of course, they became extremely visible. You can see them everywhere. But it's true that a lot of improvement has occurred in favelas, in the slums. It's amazing how many houses have been built up and improved, and some requalification of infrastructures have been carried out by governments. And so the situation of the favelas is not perhaps as bad as it might have been in the past, first of all. Also, I would say that the problem of hazardous areas is in fact a smaller portion of the total population in slums. It's significant, but it's a lesser number. In many ways, people that live in favelas are living in quite a good habitat. I mean, compared to sometimes where they came from. They came from very poor areas in the country, suffering with drought and hunger, and in the city they can live better, even if they live in a favela. That's why rents are so high in favelas. It's incredible. They've become part of the real estate market, literally. If I didn't own a house, I would probably have a difficult time with my salary to live in a hut in a favela. The prices have gone up tremendously. And but housing apparently has not been like a top priority in Brazil. And that's why I feel that something must happen. The university must do something to promote perhaps a new kind of culture in which we can build houses without depending on public money, public programs, which, as we know, are pretty inefficient, even if they're well meant, even if some excellent people are involved. But Brazil should have by now done away with certain situations that we still see in our cities, especially in the two major capitals in Brazil, but also other cities have slums and have bad conditions. But again, bad conditions is relative to where you start from. Now, what is your sense of quality? I even feel that, without being too critical about architects, the old Rudovsky is saying that architecture without architects works better. It may be applied also to the low cost housing issue, and some of the schemes that have been seen built by governments are really very poor. Brazil came out with a big financial project, Minha Casa, Minha Vida, My House, My Life policy, putting a lot of money into this, but it was not directed to situations, to cities, to neighborhoods. It was like a policy of giving money out to building construction firms who then built houses, usually in the wrong places, far from services, far from jobs, in a very repetitive and monofunctional way. So I think the university has a role, an important role to play, and that's what we're trying to do here in our nucleus, in our Nutao USP, which is the nucleus of research in technology of architecture and urbanism of the University of Sao Paulo, which is today the major university, surely in Brazil, but also in Latin America, and maybe, who knows, in the Southern Hemisphere. We are very, very, very strong in research, and we have a very good infrastructure despite our problems. And the idea to make the university more active and looking for other kind of partners is what is motivating me to move in the direction of also of housing, and especially with regards to the homeless people. The homeless in Sao Paulo, statistics talk about 15,000 homeless people that live on the streets. The number itself is not so bad, in fact, because we have a 12 million population in the city of Sao Paulo. In the metropolitan region, we're talking about more than 20 million. But in the city, it's around 11 to 12 million people. So we're talking about a person living on the street in every 1,000 people, which is in fact, when you compare this to other cities in the world. For example, I was reading about Los Angeles, which is a smaller city than Sao Paulo and has 15,000 homeless. So I think they have more homeless per capita than we do. Proportionally, Sao Paulo is not that bad, but it's still not acceptable. And the conditions in which most of these people live is really terrible because of the crack consumption. And,
I see.
There's a lot of misery that has to be faced. And strangely, no solutions have come up. no intelligent solutions.
What do you propose?
Okay, well, what we're looking into, and we're trying to make it happen, is to get the university to work with NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and non-profit associations, and other such groups, in a way of organizing campaigns to bring resources via contributions and donations. So I've been working in that line of work. So we invest in some solutions, in design solutions that we feel are interesting for that user. We show them to the users to see if they support what we've been working on, and then we work on some sort of campaign which includes other forms than simply architecture and urban design, which bring in other forms of art like music, theatre, the performing arts in general. Because I'm also a musician and a composer, I've decided to work with the homeless. I made a song for the homeless, and then a clip that will accompany the song. So that was approved by the community on last Sunday, and we should be finishing this up this month actually, and then it will go on the web. And I believe it's a way of changing a bit the approach towards city improvements by including not just the physical aspects or the infrastructural aspects, but also the non-physical, the immaterial aspects, which means really the involvement of people, the sensitivity that may be touched by other forms of art, to move people into action without much effort and involving very little money. In fact, I was so touched in this meeting because when I showed the project to the community of people that live on the streets, I said that we would be charging starting from $3, which would be 10 reais in our local currency. And one of the people there in the audience who lives in the street, he said to me whether he could help with his $3,
Wow.
which is so touching, you know. It was really amazing. I just didn't know what to say. I was left speechless, because it shows that even a person that lives in great lack of resources can be generous, and sometimes even more generous than those that have a lot of money. So the concept here is to sort of unite feeling with reason, material and immaterial aspects. And when we talk about vertical cities, we're talking about cities that make the most of the physical resources, but also in some ways, spiritually speaking, orient people towards space, towards the sky. And there is something there which is important. When they saw the building, which is a skyward structure, which sort of spirals up into the sky and full of color, and with a yellow as its main element, plus the name of the tower, Hope Tower, Torre Esperanza, Hope Tower. So I perceive that something on the spiritual plane was actually motivated by the design. So I think we architects must, I believe, open up a lot more than we have done to these non-physical, non-material aspects because they are so significant to people. And 90% or more of the Brazilian population believes in God, and they believe God in many different ways. Some believe in the gods of Africa. I went to a fantastic celebration in the city of Recife with the maracatu dancing, and they homage the king of Congo. And the king of Congo for them is a sort of a divine figure which comes from slavery. It was maintained in their as a myth amongst the African people that came to Brazil or brought here during slavery. And then we have the evangelical movement. We have a lot of Protestants, besides, of course, the great mass of Catholics that we have in the country. And now also a lot of other religions. Muslims are coming in quite a lot. I think 3 to 4% of Brazilian population is Muslim. And so there is a sense, and there's a lot of people that believe in spiritual forms of cult, and so I think that this is a power which can change a lot of things, especially if such movements are directed towards doing social good. And the university, I think, brings in that the part of the reason of the studies and research, which gives this ample support from also that part of the community which is not so religious oriented, or maybe even atheist. I was an atheist for a long time, but then I've started perceiving that when I do music, it's a thing which is not from just the mind. It's something that comes from elsewhere.
Sure. Yeah, many artists speak of that same thing. So I want to stay on this topic of immigration for a second. And I've heard other people refer to Brazil as the new land of opportunity. Do you believe this is true? And as immigrants are arriving, are they finding a good life?
It's not true always. I know that there are some immigrants that came in recently, I think from Haiti, and went down to the southern regions of the country and found many difficulties there. And some of them are actually looking for other places to go to. They haven't felt so well received, or haven't found the economic conditions that they were hoping to find, which means that if Brazil needs people, and it does, it's a country which is totally underpopulated. There is a very small population if you consider the size of the country.
Sure.
I don't know what the right term is, but I would say that if Brazil perceives that its population is not growing anymore, it's time to bring in people and bring them in a way that they may really help the country go forward, as other migrants did in the past. Sao Paulo was a city that in the beginning of last century had practically received no immigration, and the state started receiving from other parts of Brazil because of coffee and other plantations, and that brought great progress to the state of Sao Paulo. Obviously, the city of Sao Paulo was benefited by this, and so on. Then the movement brought in foreigners, Italians, a lot of Italians, Germans, from other Japanese. The Japanese had a very, very important role in the development of the state of Sao Paulo, which is the most developed state in the country. If you see a night photo of Brazil, you will see that the shining heart of Brazil is the state of Sao Paulo. And that's where most of the wealth is concentrated. So this movement of people that came to the state of Sao Paulo was not a movement of poor people. It was a movement of people that made it possible for the state to enrich them. And I believe that if countries saw the immigration situation as an opportunity for development, there's much to be done. Humans on the surface of the earth are very, very few. We only occupy, I think, 3% of the land, of the actual land, forgetting the sea, which is 90% of the earth and of our human body, but water. But it's still a very small proportion of people. I saw statistics which said that if the whole of the population of the world was concentrated in Sao Paulo, with 4 people per square meter, the city could house everybody. So it's not really a problem of numbers of people. It's how they are distributed. It's how they are involved with development, with agriculture, with industry, with any sort of human activity in the sense of progress, a material progress. But then I think also the spiritual part is very important. And we must make somehow, and we are trying to do this, is to make these housing schemes also open to different religious groups and also not non-religious groups, but trying to open up to the spiritual as a way of bringing people together, bringing them together because of faith and hope.
In terms of infrastructure and development, what are the biggest challenges that Sao Paulo is facing?
Sao Paulo it does pretty well in terms of infrastructure, but it has had some problems. It got used to receiving every summer an immense amount of water. So the city has grown and it has had available water with huge amounts of it. And it has even had problems with the access of water through floods, for example, due to the way also the flux of waters has been worked in the city. We have, in fact, 2 major rivers in the city, and the rivers are, in fact, have become lakes. The water is retained to keep the level of the rivers, which is interesting because you can use this for transportation. It's not been used for transportation, but it could be. Some attempts have been done to bring back the boats as used to happen a lot in the past before the rivers were channeled. And now they're channeled, but still so they can be used for transportation. And also cargo, boats, and a lot of interesting things can happen. There's even a proposal in our university to make a ring linking these 2 major rivers, which are at the inception of their long path inwards towards the Paraná River, 1,000 kilometers away. So we don't have much water here from the sources of the rivers, but we have a lot of rain. And we've had a lot of rain. Now, apparently, some scientists are saying that we're having less rain because of what's happening in the Amazon basin, in the areas where there's been deforestation, and that is removing a lot of the humidity that used to be brought by winds, carrying that humidity to this region, and then meeting with the cold currents coming in from the south, which always gave us a lot of water. the 2 impacts brought water to us. Now we are suffering with the lack of water. We have very little water, and we are having to work with some infrastructural solutions in order to use all the water we can. And this is a major issue now in Sao Paulo. I would say that the cleaning up of the rivers is another big issue. We're still, I think, halfway with the cleaning up and the controls of the garbage and dirt which is thrown into the rivers, especially in the areas where we have the slums, which don't have how to collect human detritus and garbage, and so this all flows into the rivers. But there's been improvement. I mean, we're halfway. 20 years ago, the polluted waters of the Tietê River system used to stretch out 300 kilometers after Sao Paolo inland. And now we're talking about maybe 80 kilometers. So we've been improving. It's slowly coming back to us. And then I believe in the next maybe 10, maybe 15 years, Sao Paulo should have clean waters if it keeps on investing as it has been investing. There are problems with pollution, noise problems still in parts of the city, lack of equipment for leisure and sports, even activities. We should have more of that. There's been a change in perception with regards to mobility in Sao Paulo, which is rather interesting. The current mayor has been investing in a lot of bike lanes, which have painted with red our landscape with these separate lanes for the bikes. And although it's not very well connected and not so much used as one would like to see, it's the right way to go. I mean, we have to keep doing that and linking up the whole city. Sao Paulo is a city with a great part of it on plains along the river, so it's rather flat land, but we do have some agitated topography, which reminds one of San Francisco in some moments when you're driving around the city.
So you mentioned these bike lanes and the fact that they're not connected, which reminds me of something else I heard you mention previously, actually, in the interview from our book, Vertical City, A Solution for Sustainable Living. And that was that you were in the process of writing a book that was a critique of the municipalities, and that basically the different branches were not working in coordination with each other, and this was causing a very disorganized city. Am I summarizing that correctly?
I think it can be said like that. A lot of effort is being done to get people sitting together and dealing with issues in a more integrated fashion. So I've seen a lot of that being done by the state, and especially the municipality. I think the municipality has done quite a lot of that. So there's been improvement in that line of integration of the work of public agencies and the participation of populations involved. There's been progress in the last 2-3 years. I think our interview was maybe in 2012, was it? 2011, 2012.
It was about that time. I wasn't with the organization then, but it was around then.
Yeah. So around then, I think that it was we felt more need of it, and it was part of the worries that underlied a book that we wrote at the university with 22 different articles. It's called Sao Paulo in the Search of Sustainability. It's unfortunately in Portuguese, just in Portuguese.
I see.
So as yet, but it has those abstracts, of the articles, and we put a lot of people thinking together, discussing different issues, and the bike issue also came up. It's one of the articles. The water wasn't such a serious problem at that time, but it was already touched by the book. And there's planning models that should be thought out, improved in the view of sustainable development. Housing aspects were also discussed, and urban design interventions in the city. There was a lot of interesting contributions in the book. And the book has been read and mentioned by some researchers. We never got to really make a discussion about the book, which was a pity. We should have done that. And but it was published by the university, so it can be found here on campus, and it's been read. It's doing okay, but I think we should really do a discussion in view also of what has been happening in the last 3 years, which could be very interesting to be compared with what we put together back in 2012. The possibility of returning where you've been in the past is always very interesting, and in a city like Sao Paulo, where a lot of things are happening all the time, it's an interesting attitude, and I think we'll do that in the near future. Maybe the beginning of next year, we'll promote a discussion with the authors, with the different authors of the articles, and check what has happened since then, and what they see as being positive and what is being negative. And then I can get you back on this after we do this.
Yes, yeah, maybe I'll have to post an update or do a follow-up interview. So far, what do you think has caused the improvements? Is it technology? Is it procedures? Or is it just a greater awareness that the different parties need to coordinate?
One of the problems with lack of coordination is actually politics. The political arena, the change in parties. Sometimes this means the non-continuation or discontinuity of programs. This can be a problem, when a certain party in power starts with something and then the next doesn't carry it on. For example, in Sao Paulo, exactly in the most critical area of the city, the last municipal government worked on the idea of a suburb developed by real estate companies, and they worked with the population. They worked with the people in commerce. They met with some difficulties. They were a bit heavy-handed with regards to the local the people living in the area, a lot of slums in the area. And because of this, they received a lot of criticism, as well as some expectation as to the change that could occur in that area, which is called luz, which in Portuguese means light. It's where the light company, the British light company, started locating its stations for the trains and power stations, and so there's it's an area that has a lot of energy related to it, and then they chose this area, which was commonly known as Cracolandia, which is the land of crack.
Wow.
A lot of crack consumers there, and people living on the streets. So it was a degraded suburb, which in the past had been like a top-notch suburb in the city. In beginning of the century, in the first decades, it's where the best people lived. And then they abandoned the area and they moved out. And so there's a lot of beautiful mansions and old buildings, which of course were then used by other people, and they were gradually degraded. So that government went into it by removing some of the population, buying off the buildings and making larger plots or even blocks, urban blocks, which would be favorable for development. But then there was a change in government, and the more leftist PT government went into power, and they disliked this project immensely. So it wasn't carried on. It was sort of left left behind by other policies in the city. And this has meant a lot of abandoned plots, abandoned spaces, and even the return of some of that population, the crack consumers, to the area, and without really a solution. And it was something that bothered me, because once you go ahead, you do something, let's try and maybe correct it, and let's try and make it work better. Let's bring back people that were expelled and not allow it to become a high-class suburb in the middle of a poor environment. Let's try and make it work better. I think that this discontinuity was not good, even if the original project perhaps had many, many problems. So I think that it's very important that governments give some credit to the guys who were in power before them. There should be even a law about this that obliges governments to follow through some programs, even if they don't agree with them fully, introducing those changes that should be introduced. And so we see there, for example, an example of this discontinuity at the level of a sort of political management of the city. And again, I believe that sometimes politics do rather than helping, sometimes they get in the way of people's needs. So we in Brazil, there's been a real watch on politicians, and a lot of criticism has been forwarded, including the PT national government right now. Our president is under a lot of pressure, and it's lacking political support, and this may worsen the current economic crisis, which is being felt in the country, and it's also been felt in Sao Paulo. That's why I think we have to look for other possibilities, other directions, which by counting on the goodwill of people can maintain social programs going even in hard economic times. And to move people is to touch them, touch their heart, touch their sensitivity, and bring them into the solution. I think that's a way to go, but I can't say, Lennon, whether I've managed to get there. Really, we're going into this, but it's a path, it's a possibility. Let's explore it, and then as we go along, I'll let you know, and perhaps even bring some good news to our community, in the sense that these attitudes and these actions may be reproduced elsewhere in different ways, in different forms, but having us architects becoming more proactive and looking for more cooperation rather than competition. We are a group of professionals that are ready to give a lot of their time, effort, money, energy whenever someone proposes a competition. But why don't we work in a more collaborative line of action by using good ideas that colleagues have brought up, putting them to use, and collaborating more between ourselves, and losing less time in competitions, and rather work with collaborations and cooperations, and look for partners. And I think the NGOs, the spiritual arena, added to the other arenas, the other agendas that exist, more private and public, I think that we can set up new ways of dealing with cities, environments, and bringing, happiness and peace and well-being to all sectors of society, not just the ones that can buy it.
Sure, absolutely. So you've been talking a little bit about policy, and Something else I've heard you advocate for is a more promotional urban regulatory system throughout Brazil. Can you just explain a little bit how you think this would work and why it's important, what benefit it might bring to the country?
Yes, I read once some text by Bobbio, who is a Italian lawyer who wrote very interesting books about laws that are more promotional rather than prohibitive. And I think we have a lot of prohibitions, generally speaking, in our urban laws, in the legislation. You're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to do above such level, you're not allowed to occupy some land beyond a certain degree. I mean, there's a lot of restrictions. Promotionally, there's very little being done. And I think that we should think of legislation in a different format. The generic legislation is okay as a reference, but there should be in every urban legislation the space for promoters, architects, urban designers to bring solutions, and which may offend or go beyond the possibilities of the legislation, but they can be accompanied by measures which balance the final benefit in a way that the city gains with it. I think in the Anglo-Saxon world, this is common. You have generic laws, but then you have the space for negotiations based on each situation. And the Roman law that underlies our legislation is more static. It's more rigid. It's not as flexible. And that's why probably Bobbio was complaining about this in the Italian context. I think a legislation which is more flexible and pliable to changes which are going on in society. We live, after all, as Bauman has said, in a liquid society, in a society of great changes and transformations. So I think that urban legislation should have that possibility of allowing groups to bring forward solutions, discuss them with the governments, bring in people from all areas, bring in the interested community to see what the impacts would be, and then establish the standards for that kind of construction or development process. I think we should have more of that in Brazil and in Sao Paulo, especially. It's too much in the hands of governments to do what should be done. I think society must be much more active. Governments should be there to help society, to aid it, to help it come along and develop, and they should not get in the way, as sometimes they do. And so the university, for example, has this incredible role. Since we deal with education, and education is based not on certainties but on doubts, and much more investigating and trying to understand how things work and should work. I think the role of the university in the establishment of legislation should be increased. We do have representation. I participated also in some groups, management groups of urban projects. We do have that representation, but we should be more proactive. I think the university is not as active as it could be, especially in countries like Brazil, which need a lot of positive change and improvements, and can be the places where these migratory fluxes could be oriented without causing problems. Much to the contrary, helping the country develop more and more, as it did in the past. So I think that legislation should have this flexibility, this inner flexibility, and the university should try to be more active to defend a more flexible form of making laws and norms about how the city should be built.
So give us an example of promotional urban regulatory system or a policy.
I know that the current urban plan in Sao Paulo, which has been recently approved, has been working with the concept of a more compact city, a more verticalized city, more compact city, and it has created forms by which developers can improve their result in their construction by building more space vertically. We have the urban operations as an experience in Sao Paulo, but now it's more directed towards the proximity of more dense and verticalized environments to the transportation system, which is a discussion we've had for many decades here in Sao Paulo. Even in our university, I worked on a project with this kind of worry, looking at the expansion of the city outwards through a system of integrated communities with public transportation and dense and verticalized solutions near the stations for using especially the train as a form of mobility, but also relating these nuclei to regional transportation and highway systems and so bringing it all together. So this research was done in the 90s, around 98 to 2000, when I participated of a meeting on megacities in Hong Kong, and we presented this concept. And I got 10 universities involved, besides ours, 9 more. And each university studied a certain part of the city where they were close to, and bringing up some interesting ideas. And we took those to Hong Kong at the time. So I see that these ideas that were put forward in the community, in the academic community, have started to influence policymakers, and the current urban plan of the city of Sao Paulo has that attitude, as that concept of concentrating people closer to the mobility systems, and yes, promoting more verticalized buildings, which also seem to go to meet the expectations of those who invest and want to see some results, since land is expensive and people tend to migrate now internally within the city closer to public transportation, which is slowly picking up and articulating itself and offering better conditions for people to move around the city. Not enough of it, of course, but at least it's happening. It has been happening, and maybe because of the crisis, we've been seeing a certain reduction in the use of the car going on, and this added to the policy of the bike lanes and some improvements and expansion of the subway system is already showing the trend. I think Sao Paulo will become a multi-nucleated city more and more so, with development happening close to the subway stations, to the metropolitan train stations, and some other forms of mobility which are based on the concept of stations, like monorail, for example. They're building some monorail systems with some difficulties, but it's coming along. I mean, it's going to be a reality as well. So for different types of demands, of mobility demands, different solutions can work. monorail can be more efficient than subway in certain situations, subway better than metropolitan trains in others, and metropolitan trains better than the other two in others. So a city this size, a mega city like Sao Paulo, needs to have all the options on the table in order to make do, to have people move around.
Absolutely.
And with avoiding the crisis that we've had in our traffic system.
All right. So, Bruno, with just a couple of minutes left, do you have any call to actions or last remarks that you would like to give to our listeners?
Well, I think that we must use the word hope that we used in our tower as a driving force. I think we must be optimistic. We must try and get people working together in a more collaborative way. We must look at other sources, financial sources, to make things happen, and not just rely on the market and on the state. And generosity, urban generosity, is something which is not that difficult to obtain if you know how to obtain it, if you know how to move people in that direction. We have a lot of resources today in the world. We are a very affluent society, generally speaking, even if we have areas and regions and countries which are very poor. But we've attained a level of material well-being which is uncomparable to any other time in history. But we've somehow lost some of that sense of solidarity that maybe in poorer communities was, the way of dealing with situations in tribal societies. And it is comforting to know, for example, that the US, who are a very developed and affluent society, is also a very generous society. This is very good. It's good news because it shows that even if you get rich, it doesn't mean that you get poor in spirit. It's all a matter of seeing things happen, accompanying processes in which poverty is faced and solved. And if we can move those powers, those material powers, in the direction of social change, social improvement, bettering of conditions of life on Earth, we all will come off better as we do that. So even the rich guys know that it's better to live in a wealthier society, in a society that where every child has access to good things, and every elderly person can face old age with hope. I think that's it.
All right. Well, Bruno, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. It's been an excellent interview.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Vertical City. Learn more about the Vertical City concept and continue the conversation by visiting our website, verticalcity.org. I truly hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe to our podcast, leave a review on iTunes, and most importantly, share Vertical City with your friends and colleagues so that together we can create solutions for sustainable living. I'm Lennon Richardson, signing off for the Vertical City team. See you next time.